Hey guys and girls, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the teleport service and how to teleport a player from one place to the next, and how to use the teleport service to reserve servers, and how to save data into the data store for each reserved server, and also how to use the messaging service to send messages from one server to the next. So we can currently see I'm in the main server by this sign over here that I've placed, and we have 3 doors. This door on the left takes us to place A, and these 2 doors takes us to place B. So let's first go into place A, and we're now getting teleported, so let's wait a little while. And now you can see that we're in place A, and the sign says place A, and we have a door to go back to the main place. So I can walk back through this door and it should teleport me back to the main place. These 2 doors on the right side will take me to place B, but each door takes me to a different reserved server. So if I go into this door on the left side, and now we can see that we're in place B, and we can see that this place has a value of 50, and I can press the E key to increase the value, so now it has a value of 51. So I can go back to the main place, and if I go back into the door on the left side, we can see that the value of 51 was saved and loaded from the data store correctly. And if I go back to the main place once again, and now if I go onto the door on the right side, instead of having the value of 51, this place has a value of 11. And I can increase the value on this place, like so. And if we look at the doors for place B, we can see that there are 0 out of 100 players in that place for each door. And if I walk into this door and teleport to that place, we can now see that place B on the left door has 1 out of 100 players in that server. So to get started, I've created a baseplate project and I've published this place to Roblox and I've called it main. The next thing I've done is added 2 places. So if I go into Asset Manager and click on the Places folder, we can see that we have the main place, and I've added 2 more places. You can add 2 places by simply right-clicking and pressing Add New Place. If you don't want to create a new place but reuse an unused place you've created before, what you can do is come over to the Create tab in the Roblox website and go to the place that you've published. Click on this button over here, Configure Experience, and come down to Places and press the Add Place button, and here it will allow you to select places that you have not used to add to this experience. So now that we've created our 2 places, I've now created a sign, and this sign is simply 2 parts, and within one part there is a surface GUI, and inside of this surface GUI is a text label, and I've set the text to main so that we don't get confused in what place we're in when we're playing the game. The next thing I've done is added a door. So here we can see my door model, which I've called door A, and it consists of parts and wedges for the frame, and a part for the touch part, which is this part in the center of the door. And on the top part of the frame, I've added a surface GUI and a text label the same way I have for the sign. So now we have our door model for the touch part that's going to teleport the player to place A. What I'm going to do is add a script, get service, teleport service. I'm then going to connect a function to the touch event for the touch part. So script.parent.touched connect function, and this function is going to return a part that touched the touch part. The next thing I'm going to do is check the name of the part that touched this part to make sure it's called humanoid root part. So I'm going to say if part.name is not equal to humanoid root part, then return. I'm then going to use the part's parent to get the player. So I'm going to say player equals game.players get player from character, and I'm going to use the part's parent. Now let's use the teleport service to teleport a player. And if we look in the documentation, we can see that we look at the teleport method. We can see that it says the numerous teleport function used instead. And if we scroll down to another method, for instance teleport to place, then we can see we get the same message here. So we can see that all functions have been consolidated, and Roblox recommends that we use the teleport async function. So if we look at the teleport async function, and we can see that it requires the place ID, and it requires an array of players to teleport, and optionally we can provide a teleport options, and it should return a teleport async result object. There is also a link here to an article called Teleporting Between Places, and if we open this link we can see that it shares information, and for instance it shares how to handle failed teleports, and we can follow this and look at this code to see how to handle failed teleports. So let's now use the teleport service to teleport this player to place A. So first thing I'm going to write is teleport service, teleport async, and the first value we need is the place ID. To get the place ID, I'm going to right click on place A and copy ID to clipboard. And then I'm going to paste the ID into the function. And the next thing that we need is the players, which is going to be a table of players, but we're only going to teleport one player. So I'm going to create an empty table and place the player variable into the table. And for the teleport options, we're just going to keep it as empty. So we're just going to use the default teleport options. There is a chance that the teleport async function may fail and produce an error. So we should use pcall to call this function. Now I use pcall slightly differently, so let me first show you how to convert this into a call without using the colon. So to do this call without using colon, we change the colon to a dot, then we use teleport async, and then when we use a colon, this value is automatically placed as the first parameter of the function. So I'm going to put this as the first parameter of the function. Then I'm going to put in the place ID, and then I'm going to put in the table of players we want to teleport. So this line of code is the exact same as this line of code. The only difference is because we've used a colon on here, Lua will automatically place this as the first parameter into the function. So now we know how to call this function without using a colon. Now let's set up our pcall. So success result equals pcall, and first we require the function that we're going to call. So we're going to call the teleport async function, And then we require the perimeters. So we're going to copy these perimeters into here, like so. And now we can delete these two lines of code. And this is how we can use pcall to call the teleport async function. If we now test the game, we can see that we have our door with the sign. And if I walk into the door, we get an error. It says exception while signaling cannot teleport in Roblox Studio. So the only way to test the teleport async function is to publish the game and to play the game inside of Roblox. So if I now walk through the door, and after a small delay, my character should get teleported to place A. Now let's display a notification saying teleporting when the player is getting teleported. So inside of Starter GUI, I've created a screen GUI and a text label, and I've set the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5 and the position to 0.5, 0.75, and I've placed UI corner inside of the text label to give it rounded corners. And now I'm going to create a local script inside of the screen GUI, and I'm first going to delete the hello world print, and inside of replicated storage I'm going to create a remote event, and I'm going to call this remote event teleporting. And now I'm going to connect a function to the remote event, so I'm going to say game replicated storage dot teleporting on client event connect function. And inside of this function, all I'm going to do is say script.parent.enabled equals true. So I'm going to be enabling the screen GUI, and we can currently see it's enabled already. And we can see the GUI down here. So I'm going to make sure to disable the screen GUI so it starts disabled, and when we receive the event, it's going to enable the screen GUI, and then I'm going to wait for 10 seconds, and then I'm going to disable the GUI. And now I'm going to go back into the script inside of the touch part of the door, and I'm first going to check if the success is equal to false. So if success is equal to false, then return and do nothing. But if success is equal to true, I'm going to use the remote event to fire to the client and tell them to call this function. And if we now test the game in Studio, we can see that if I touch this part, the teleport GUI appears. We still get the same errors like before, and after 10 seconds this GUI should hide again. Let's now add a blur effect when a player is getting teleported. So inside of lighting, I'm going to add blur effect, and I'm going to set the blur effect to a size of 0 by default. And now inside of the local script, inside of the screen GUI, I'm going to get the tween service to tween the blur effect when we receive the teleporting event. So I now have the tween service, and I'm now going to create a tween info. So tween info equals tweeninfo.new, and I want it to take 1 second for the blur effect to fade in and 1 second for it to fade out. And I'm now going to create a tween using the tween service. So tween1 equals tween service create, and I'm going to be tweening the blur, this object here, and we're going to use this tween info, and we're going to tween the size up to 24. I'm now going to create a second tween, so I'm going to copy and paste tween1, and I'm going to rename this to tween2, and I want tween2 to tween the size back to 0. So now when we receive the teleporting event, I want to play tween 1, and after 10 seconds I want to play tween 2. So if we play the game again inside of Studio and I touch the door, we can see that the screen blurs out. I still receive the error. I get the teleporting notification, and after 10 seconds it twins back out and the GUI disappears. And I've now published the game, so if I touch the door again, we can see that the screen blurs out, and before the 10 seconds have finished, I have been teleported to the next place. Now let's add the ability to teleport back from place A back to the main place. So to open place A, I'm going to double click on place A inside of the Asset Manager. Now inside of place A, I've added the sign just like the main place and the door just like the main place, and I've added the blur with the size of 0, and I've added the teleport event into replicated storage just like the main, and I've also created the screen GUI with the text label, and we can see if I enable it, we can see the GUI here. So everything is almost the same as the main place, and I'm going to copy the local script from the main place into the place A. So we have the exact same local script, and the same for the touch of the door. So inside of the door, I'm going to copy the script and paste it into the touch part. So we have the exact same script inside of the door. The only difference is I'm going to change the place ID. So I'm going to go into Places, and I'm going to right click on Main, copy ID, and I'm going to replace it with the main ID. So I've now published the changes, and I'm going to go into place A, and we can now see that we have the sign and the door, and this door should allow me to teleport back to the main place. So what I've done now is created 2 more doors called door B, and inside of the touch part, all I'm going to do is copy and paste the script from door A into door B, like so, and I'm also going to change the place ID. So I'm going to right click on place B, copy ID, paste it into here, and do the same for the other door B, like so. So if we look at place B is the exact same as place A, so it has the exact same touch script, and it has the exact same local script inside of the screen GUI, and the only difference is that the sign says place B and the base plate is a yellow color. So I've now published changes, and I'm testing the game, and if someone goes into the left door and I walk into the right door, Roblox will teleport us into a server that we have not reserved. So this is just a standard server that has not been reserved. So now let's reserve a server. To do this, we're going to be using the reserve server method. So if we look at this method, we require a place ID, and it's going to return 2 values, one being the access code and one being the private server ID. Now, like teleport async, the reserve server method only works in-game and not inside of Studio. So while we're in game, I'm going to press the F9 key and press on the server button, and here on the command line I can type this command. So I'm going to say print, and then I'm going to get the teleport service, and I'm going to use the reserve server function, and I'm going to pass in the place ID for place B and press enter. And here we can see that we have the access code on the left and the private ID on the right. Now the problem with doing this is I'm not able to copy and paste this code because Roblox's developer console does not allow for selecting text. So let's make a script with a text box for us to easily select and copy and paste the access code. So inside of ServerScript service, in our main place, I'm going to create a new script, and I'm going to name this script reserve server, and I'm going to delete hello world. Now inside of this script, I'm going to connect a function to the player added event. I'm now going to check the player's user ID and return if the player is not me. So I'm going to say if player.userid is not equal to my ID, then return. If you're not sure what your ID is, what you can do is play the game, and inside of players, select your player, and if we come down to user ID, you can copy and paste your ID from here. The next thing I'm going to do is reserve a server. So I'm going to say local code ID equals GameGetService teleport service reserve server, and I'm going to use the place ID for place B and pass that into the reserve server function. The next thing I'm going to do is create two text boxes and a screen GUI, and inside of the text boxes I'm going to set the text to code and ID. So first create the screen GUI, and I'm going to set the parent to player.playerGUI. Then I'm going to create text box 1, and I'm going to position and size the text box, and I'm going to make sure to set clear text on focus to false so that we can select the text, and I'm going to set the text to code, and then I'm going to do the same but this time for the ID. So if we test the game now, we can see that we get an error because we're not able to reserve a server inside of Studio. But if we test the game inside of Roblox, we can see that the text box has showed us the access code and the ID. So what I'm going to do is open Notepad and take a note. So I'm going to copy and paste both the access code and ID to Notepad, and then I can close the game. And because I no longer want to reserve any more servers, I'm going to disable this script like so it no longer runs when I run the game. And inside of door B, the one on the right side, I'm going to open the script, and I'm now going to create teleport options. So I'm going to say local teleport options equals instance.new teleport options. I'm then going to set the teleport options access code. So I'm going to say teleport options dot reserved server access code equals, and I'm going to look inside of my notepad and copy the access code and paste it into here like so. And finally, I want to pass these teleport options into the teleport async call. So I'm going to copy teleport options, and after the player list, I'm going to pass the teleport options. So now the door on the left will take us to a generic server, while the door on the right will take us to a reserved server. So what that means is, if I walk into the left door, Roblox will add me to an existing server, or if there is no more space remaining for me to fit in an existing server a new server will be created, so there could be multiple servers running for place B. But the way a reserved server works is Roblox will place me into a server and will continue to add players to the same server, and once that reserved server fills, it will no longer accept any more players to teleport to that server, and they will receive an error when attempting to teleport to it. So because we know that a reserved server will only have one instance running at a time, what we can do is load data from the data store and cache the data on the single instance of that server, and when that server closes, save the data back into the data store and not have to worry about syncing the data between multiple servers. But there is one edge case we need to be careful of. If we look at the reserve server method and look at the cross-platform play section, we can see it says players on Xbox One with cross-platform play disabled will arrive in a different server with players with cross-platform play enabled. This can cause multiple game servers with the same server ID to exist. So what that means is, if you enable console access to your game, instead of there only being one server per reserved server, it will now be possible for there to be two servers per reserved server. What I've done now is in place B, I've created a new script inside of ServerScript service, and this script is almost identical to the reserved server script we created in the main place. And what this script does, it first checks to make sure that the player ID is me, then it creates a screen GUI, creates a text box, and we set the text to the private server ID so that we can see the ID of the place when we enter it. And so now if I test again and I walk into the left door, which is not a reserved server, and we can see that the text box is an empty text box, so this server has no private ID. So let's go back to the main place, and let's go back into the right door this time. So this is the reserved server, and we can now see the private ID. And if we look at my notepad and we cross-reference the two IDs, we can see that both IDs are the exact same. So now I'm going to turn the left door into a reserved server as well. So to do this, I'm going to delete the script for the left door, and I'm going to copy the script from the right door to the left door, and I'm going to open these two scripts so we can see that both of these scripts are using this same access code, but I want them to use different access codes. So I'm going to use my reserved server script, which I've already done. So on my notepad, we can see I now have two access codes for the left and right door. So for the left door, I'm going to copy the access code and replace it with the new access code. So now the left and right door have two different access codes. Okay, so now let's set up the data store for place B. I'm going to be using the same data store method as I did in this video, so if you get confused, you can also watch this video to help you understand how the data store works. So the first thing I'm going to do is inside of ServerScript service, I'm going to create a new script, and I'm going to rename this script to data store, and I'm going to delete the hello world print. If we look at the reserve server function, we can see that it says you can see if a current server is a reserved server by using the following code. So we need to check to see that the private server ID is not equal to an empty string, and we also need to check that the private server owner ID is equal to 0. So inside of my data store script, the first thing I'm going to do is say if game private server ID is equal to an empty string, or if private server owner ID is not equal to 0, then return and exit out of this script early. The next thing I'm going to do is get the data store service, and the next thing I'm going to do is use the data store service to get the data store, and this data store is going to be called server. I'm then going to use the private server ID as the key to retrieve the data. So I'm going to say success value equals to pcall data store get async, and remember, because we're not using a colon, we pass the first value into the pcall, and then I'm using the private server ID as the key. And now, if for some reason the getAsync function fails, what I'm going to do is say if success equals false, then for I player in game players get players player.kick, and I'm going to say data store failed to load, and then I'm going to return out of this function like I did here and prevent the rest of the code from executing. But if the data store loaded successfully, I'm going to create a variable called data, and I'm going to say data equals value or an empty table. What I've done now is inside of server storage, I've created a folder called server data, and within this folder I can create any folders I like, and we can name them anything we like, and we can have as many as we like, and within these folders I can create values. For instance, I can create int values, string values, and boolean values, and I've for now only want one value, so I'm just going to have one folder called data, and I want a value called gold, and I want the default value to be 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is loop through every child inside of this server data folder. So I'm going to say for I folder in game server storage dot server data get children do. The next thing I'm going to do is say local subdata equals data, and I'm going to use the folder's name as a key, or subdata is going to be equal to an empty table. The next thing I'm going to do is loop through every child in this subfolder. So I'm going to say for I child in folder get children do, and this is going to get every value inside of this subfolder. And then I'm going to say child.value equals subdata, and I'm going to use the child's name as a key or child value. So if the data does not exist within inside the data store, then we're going to use the default value. So if gold was equal to 0, it would still equal to 0 if the data is not found inside the data store. So now that we've loaded the data from the data store, when the server closes, we're going to save the data. So I'm going to use game bind to close function, and inside of this function I'm going to create a new data table. I'm then going to loop through every folder inside of server data once again. So I'm going to copy and paste this over here like so. I'm now going to create another variable called subdata, and it's going to be equal to an empty table. And now I'm going to loop through every value inside of the folder. So I'm going to use folder get children, and then I'm going to save the child's value into the subdata table using the child's name as a key, and here's the child's value. And once we've looped every child and added every child's value, I'm now going to add the subdata table into the data table. So I'm going to say data folder.name as the key equals subdata. And now I'm going to destroy the folder, this folder here, So I'm going to say folder destroy, and this is going to indicate to other scripts that we can no longer use the data store. And finally, I'm going to save this data table into the data store. So to do this, I'm going to say success value equals pcall data store set async, and I'm going to pass the data store, and then I'm going to pass the private server ID just like I did over here, and we're going to pass this data table into the data store. Now if we play the game in Studio, because the private server ID will be equal to an empty string, this code will not run in Studio. So we must publish the game for this code to work. So that we can test to see that the data store is working, what I've done is cloned the sign and renamed the new sign to gold, and just like the sign, it has a service GUI and a text label, and inside of the text label I'm going to create a script and delete the hello world print like this. And inside of this script I'm going to get this gold value here, so I'm going to say local gold value equals game server storage dot server data dot data dot gold. I am then going to set the text label to have the same value as this gold value, so I'm going to say script.parent.text equals gold value dot value. I'm then going to assign a changed event to the gold value, so I'm going to say gold value dot changed connect function, and this is going to give me the value, so I'm going to simply copy and paste this and set the text to the new value. What I'm going to do now is close this script, and inside of this part of the sign I'm going to add an attachment, and I'm going to move this attachment up so it's above the sign, and inside of this attachment I'm going to put a proximity prompt, and inside of this proximity prompt I'm going to create a script and delete the hello world print. Now inside of this proximity prompt script I'm going to get the gold value just like we did for the text label. I'm then going to detect when the proximity prompt is triggered, so I'm going to say script.parent triggered connect function, and this is going to tell me which player triggered the event, and all I'm going to do inside of this function is increase the gold value by 1. Now if we test this inside of Studio, we can see that the sign has a value of 0, and if I press E it increments the gold value, but if I stop and start the game, we can see that the value goes back to 0, so the data store script is not working inside of Studio. But if I publish the game and go into the left door, we can see that it starts with a value of 0, and if I increase this to 3 and exit the server, so the server closes. So now that the server has closed, the data should have been saved into the data store. So now if I enter the same reserved server again, the server should reopen, and because it has the same ID, the data store should load from the same key, and we can see it has a value of 3 again. And if I exit this server, and if I enter the right door, being a different server, we can see that this one does not have the value of 3 and has the value of 0. Let's now use the messaging service so that the reserved servers can send a message to the servers indicating how many players are within the server. So in place B, inside of server script service, I'm going to create a new script, and I'm going to call this script messaging, and I'm going to delete the hello world print, And the first thing I'm going to do in this script is, just like the data store script, I'm going to check to make sure that this is a reserved server. So I'm going to copy and paste this part of the code into my messaging script, so that if the server is not a reserved server, we're going to return and prevent the rest of the script from executing. The next thing I'm going to do is get the messaging service. So I'm going to say messaging service equals game get service messaging service. The next thing I'm going to do is create a function called update, and this function is going to pass in a player. And now when a player is added or removed from the server, I'm going to call this update function. So I'm going to say game.players player added connect, and I'm going to connect the update function. And I'm going to do the same for the player removing event. If we look at the messaging service, we can see that there is a method called publish async, and we can see that this method requires two parameters, the first being the topic and the second being the data, and we can see that this does not return anything. So inside of my update function, what I'm going to do is use the messaging service and use the publish async function, and I'm going to use the private server ID as the key, and I'm going to pass the amount of players in the server. I've now come back to the main place, and for door B I'm going to go into the top part where it has the place B label and go into Surface GUI and text label, and I'm going to create a new script and delete the hello world. And inside of this script I'm going to get the messaging service. So I'm going to say messaging service equals game get service messaging service, and now instead of using publish async, we're going to be using subscribe async, and the parameters this function needs are the topic and a function as the callback. So what I'm going to do now is say messaging service subscribe async, and we're going to pass in a function to subscribe, and here we're going to need to put the private ID of the server we want to listen to. So if we look at the notepad, we can see that the private ID for the left door is this value here. So I'm going to copy and paste this value as the topic. And finally, I'm going to now update the text label to have the data of the message. So to do this, I'm going to say script.parent.text equals place account. So now let's do the same script for the door on the right side. Copy and paste the script into that text label. And so when the server first starts, there will be no data above the doors because no messages have been received up till now. And as soon as anyone enters the door and joins the server, now the reserved server has sent a message, and this server has received the data of the message. Thank you for watching my video, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below.